Good afternoon. It is THCB gang. We are back again. We've had kind of a hell of a hiatus. There was the conference that Jessica the Master and I ran. I went to England for a week. There was the remnants of Hurricane Ida, which flooded out 3 of our participants 1 week. So it's been a while since we've been together, but we are back with a small but mighty team and looking forward to discussing and digesting the week, the months, and the year of healthcare and health technology and healthcare business. And so we're ready to go. Who do we have this week? Well, I'm Matthew Holt, the founder of THCB, at Bolty Boy on Twitter, and your host. And my guests this week are all regulars, although a couple of them haven't been on for a while. Well, I guess no one's been on for a while. Kim Bellard, writer, prognosticator, THCB contributor. Grace Cordovano, board certified patient advocate, enlightening results, at Grace Cordovano on Twitter. Casey Quinlan, fierce patient activist from the Healthcare is Hilarious podcast, and currently doing well after a cancer, I wouldn't say diagnosis, but experience. And Mike Magee, medical historian. All right, here we go, everybody. We're all on. We're live streaming away on YouTube. We will be obviously, and you may be listening to this on the podcast later. So let's start as ever. I want to go around and ask people what they're seeing and what they're looking at the moment. And I'm going to start with you, Kim.
Well, I've been watching to see if Congress can, in fact, walk and chew gum at the same time. And not too promising, but I understand they just passed the funding of the government bill. So they haven't tripped entirely, but they sure look like they're on their way down. It's pretty discouraging.
Yeah, it's quite amazing when you think about it, the power that a couple of senators have. And we'll discuss more about that. Casey.
Well, I last week actually got on an airplane and flew to a conference to be a big girl wearing actual pants and showing up in a room full of people that ostensibly were all vaccinated. I know I showed my card. And I found myself once again, it's kind of like, Groundhog Day, a shiny, happy BS about how everything would be fine if we just let the people, just set free the people to do whatever. It's a patient experience symposium. There were some really powerful sessions, but there were also some things that just had me wanting to smack somebody, and I wasn't really sure who, whether it was the presenters or the policy people who keep standing in the way of actual meaningful change or whatever. But, I'm back. And by the way, it's a cancer recurrence. So yes, So that recurrence. Stage 4, I'm having fun, #Mets party, but I'm still here and I'm even more dangerous now.
We love it. We love it. We love it. And I'm glad to see you getting on a plane. I have been on a plane internationally now, and it's quite exciting. Mike.
Yeah, Matthew, as Kim was saying, the Democrats are going back and forth, but I listened to Pelosi's press conference today, and I came away impressed. I mean, just by her resilience, her strength, her age, her wisdom. She knows a lot of politics, and it sort of mirrors what I was saying about Biden a couple of weeks ago, that betting against some of these veteran politicians is, maybe right, but I got a feeling they're going to pull it out. So I'll remain optimistic.
All right. Well, I'll set you and Kim off against each other a bit later than that. Grace, what have you been up to? What are you looking at?
Oh,
by the way, great to have you back. It's been way too long since you've been on.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be back. But this week, there was a triggering article on information blocking rules that about 24 different people, from patients to their families, to people in policy, to vendors, all were pinging and messaging me. And it's a MedPage Today article titled "Privacy Exception, No Cure for Doctors' Open Notes Headaches." If you haven't read it, take a look. But basically, we're still kind of in the crux of this pushback that doctors think that this is too stressful, that patients shouldn't have access to their medical records, and we really need to push back and hold on, we're causing harm. And it's just overwhelming and frustrating, because I know so many patients who are still waiting weeks for their pathology, for their imaging, for their medical records requests. And this is supposed to be a blessing, and doctors are angry at the wrong people, in my opinion. So I'd like to dig into that a little bit later.
Yeah, a couple of things on that point. One is a member of the gang, JL Neptune, who, as you know, is a doc, made a tweet, which I think he kind of backed down from a bit. But what he was basically saying is he didn't think it was a good idea to release lab results without context around them directly to the patients. And there's a bunch of, I know Kaiser for years has been doing this, and others in their Epic My Chart have been doing it. It's a question about what does context mean and what should you release, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it was perhaps overinterpreted as saying that he felt that it should be delivered by a doctor or a clinical professional rather than delivered with context around it. But nonetheless, that's a question. And then I actually saw, I'll dig into it a bit. I was hosting a, hang on, let me get this right. Jessica and I are the color commentary in the UCSF Health Hub Awards. Now, it's no longer called the Health Hub. It's the UCSF Health Awards. So a guy called Mark Goldstein, who's a VC, has put together this thing called the UCSF Health Hub that has mass awards for digital health companies. I think 1,500 companies entered this. I actually did a bunch of judging. I don't know how you guys didn't get dragged into judging as well, because everyone I know was dragged into judging. And he saw all these startups and all their ideas. And I did a review of some of the finalists in a category I didn't judge, which was the EHR addendum. The category is like more advanced stuff around EHRs, and had a bunch of companies who are mostly around moving data around from EHRs to each other and to customers. And there were a couple in there who were looking at, can we move imaging around as well? And how far does that get? Casey is confused.
No, I mean, that's one of my biggest arguments with this whole thing about how, my data is available to me in a portal somewhere, which is total BS because it's all just words. If I want to, I can't share a link. I can't share a document unless I turn it into an image. But meanwhile, they can't share images with me, i.e. DICOMs or, et cetera, anything from imaging still has to go through some kind of a, car wash. I don't know what, but I know that Dave DeBronkart is working for a company that is ostensibly, working on this. Don't answer.
Backpack, right? Or Picnic? Picnic?
My Pocket Health.
Which one?
My Pocket Health?
My Pocket, yeah.
No, is it My Pocket? Well, anyway, it's something. You can go out there and find it on his LinkedIn thing. I don't know. But, I should have been more prepared for this meeting. I didn't realize we were going to be discussing that. Kidding. Anyway, the whole thing around images is it's a bête noire for folks inside the castle too. Doctors trying to share. When I got my scan, the first real baseline after treatment, almost dead, like Wesley in Princess Bride in June, not dead now, and got my first real baseline scan of how the treatment was actually working. If it apparently is, on my cancer. My orthopedic surgeon, who has been with me throughout this ride, because he was the one who actually helped diagnose what was really going on after we chased it for months as a recurrence of a back issue. But he had to go, and he's in Epic, a different system than my oncologist, but in Epic. And I can see all of his stuff and all my oncologist stuff and whatever. I've assembled a care plan based on only people who use Epic. Luckily, it worked out for me. But anyway, it took him almost a week to get a hold of the images. And he apparently had to go through some kind of like elbow flinging thing to try to actually get access to the images that I said, hey, if you can see these, can you give me your take on what this looks like? And he finally did get back to me. And he said, you won't believe what I had to go through to get at these images. And I'm like, no, actually, I would totally believe it. But, but then he was able to tell me what he saw, which was all good news. So yay. But still, it's like, why is it so hard? And it's because high tech, when they wrote it, nobody said you have to share. Everybody just assumed that everyone would play nice in the sandbox, and no. And then the radiologists are a whole other problem. But there's actually some interesting stuff going on there. But the powers that be in the radiology zone don't seem to like some of these fixes. So they're trying to squash them. It's interesting. Anyway,
the company who I was judging was called DICOM Grid. It's now called Ambra. Or Ambra, A-M-B-R-A. And I asked the CEO, I said, okay, this has been a huge problem especially for patients, right, getting access to their images. and there's not only radiology, there's also pathology slides and God knows what else. And he said, yeah, we're doing well, we're growing like crazy, everything's great, blah, 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 blah for us as a startup. But we are, everyone uses that early innings analogy for how far we are in transformation. He said, we're still at the top of the first. Incidentally, I went to the baseball last night. The Giants won their 104th game and are still not guaranteed to win the division, but that's a separate.
And they get to play the Cardinals probably.
Well, they may play the Cardinals or the Dodgers. We'll see what happens in that wild card game. Or they may end up be playing the Cardinals in the wild card. We'll see how it all shakes out in the next 2 days. Anyway,
I think your Giants are doing better than the New York Giants.
That's usually the case, having studied the New York Giants camp. Although there are a couple of times where they catch the ball off their helmet and win the Super Bowl. But
yeah, we're a Giants family, so we're grieving here.
Well, when Matthew said he and Jess were the color commentary, I immediately thought they're the Eli and Peyton of health tech.
I haven't seen this Eli and Peyton thing. Jess thinks we're the what are the two grumpy old men in the Muppets called?
Oh yeah, that's right. I can't remember their name.
We'll think of their name. Wilbur and something. All right. So we can dig in a bit more on that, or we can go. Let's go back to the big politics topic of the day, right? Which is where we think we're ending up. And Kim and Mike seem to be disagreeing. I've been sitting there going, how did Kristen Sinema go from being a green anti-war liberal activist, to the left of the Democratic Party in 2003, 4, 5, 6 to 10, to becoming now essentially a quasi-Republican senator at the moment, who wants, by the way, whose office, and among other things for us policy wonks, was pushing around a memo advocating for increasing Medicare Advantage rates. So I'm wondering that transformation, which is quite interesting from a Democrat. So that was interesting, and I wonder, it doesn't seem to be as though she wants to negotiate about what should be in the bill. And just to remind everybody, I mean, in the bill, the 3.5 trillion, not the 1 trillion, which is the pure infrastructure, but the 3.5, which is all the stuff we've been talking about since they announced
that's
it.
That's the Build Back Better full program.
But in that is a whole bunch of stuff that's related to healthcare, including all that Medicare expansion, to dental and to I'm blanking something else.
Eyes and ears.
Dental, eyes, ears, and also the caregiving part, right? So Kim, you sound like a pessimist. Mike, you sound a bit more optimistic. Yes, and Nancy Pelosi has got a great track record of pulling rabbits out of hats and stealing the weak men around her to actually get stuff done.
So two things. First, so they got the shutdown thing done today, although they're only pushing it down the road to December.
That's just the government shutdown.
The government shutdown. They will get the debt limit
thing, which is
they will get the debt limit done somehow. It's not going to go into default. They'll go angst for a couple of weeks. What my real concern is that the way that the progressives and the moderates are fighting about the infrastructure and the Build Back Better. I mean, it's a win to get the infrastructure bill passed. They got 19 Republicans to vote it in the Senate. The fact that they're holding that for hostage to do the Build Back Better is really, to me, the Democrats trying to steal defeat out of the jaws of victory again. And I'm very worried that they're both going to.
Not the Democrats. It's two Democrats.
No, it's not. It's the House. The Senate passed the infrastructure bill. There's no reason the House shouldn't pass it as well.
But if they pass it, this is what Bernie Sanders and you call it progressives, but this is what the hell Biden essentially was elected on this platform, right? Build Back Better, which involved all this stuff, and it wasn't just supposed to be roads and bridges. I don't know which of the two bills is the broadband stuff in. Is that in the 1 trillion?
That's an infrastructure.
That's an infrastructure. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff there, right? Which is required, and yeah, you can argue back and forth. Is the economy doing well enough? It doesn't need the extra funds and all the rest of it. But I'd argue that the society, needs a lot of what's in the Build Back Better part. You can argue that, but it's not like he was elected that this was a radical lefty, AOC Che Guevara agenda he was elected on. This was regarded as pretty mainstream, and I think most of us who sent money to who elected Democrats or sent money to Democrats, including to the ones in Arizona, were pretty shocked that they're not on board for this. And so I know it is two Democrats now. I know, but the House, the progressives, the Sanders and the progressives in the House are going to say, if you pass that one without a guarantee you get the second one passed, the second one's dead. and the second one's more important. So that's why it's being held hostage, if you
But,
like.
you know, I would argue that the infrastructure is the basic, is the minimum of what you have to do. Like federal highway funding gets cut off tomorrow if they don't pass the infrastructure bill. So that's, you know, there's a lot of current spending in that bill that's not getting reauthorized unless you pass that bill. So to say that we shouldn't even do that if we don't get this other thing is like, I want the whole pie or nobody gets any pie. And I just don't agree with that.
Well, do you think there'll be any? Well, so we'll ask Mike has been in a second, but do you think that if they pass it, do you think there's any chance they'll get Manchin or Sinema to come and come in on anything? Because as far as I can tell, they don't seem to want to negotiate anything. Last time he said he might do a trillion.
Both Manchin and Sinema have given Biden what they want to, what their upper limits are and what they want in it. It hasn't been made public, although Manchin said his number is 1.5. Sinema says that both Schumer and Biden know exactly what she wants. So they're still willing to compromise, but they can't get it done today or tomorrow. So, you know, the progressives need to have some faith in Pelosi, like Mike says, that they will get this other bill passed. It's important to a lot of people, but it may not be the exact bill that they want. And that's Congress. But don't hold hostage this other thing that everybody agrees does a lot of good things.
Mike, what do you think?
Well, as you guys know, my dad was a doctor and he was a generalist. And the last thing he said to 3 of his children, he had 12, 3 of us who were going into medicine, the last thing he'd say every night is become a specialist. So, you know, that's kind of bred into me. And I believe that there is a profession of being a politician, and I believe some of these people are specialists at what they do. And so when you get, you know, the caliber of a Schumer, Pelosi, Biden all working together, I tend not to second guess them because I believe they're doing everything that is humanly possible to make this thing work. Now, it may not work, but I'm not sure I'm qualified to tell them how to do it better. The other thing my father used to say, he got Alzheimer's disease, and for the last 3 years of his life, the first thing he'd say every morning when he woke up is, "What's the plan, Grace?" My mother was Grace. And so my father still had enough wits about him to understand you got to have a plan. And, you know, as Grace and Casey were talking about these issues that continue to plague us in healthcare, you know, the thing that I'm dealing with, because I'm focused at the moment on medical legal history, is not so much what is the right or not right to healthcare. Do we have the right to healthcare? Is it a universal right? My question is, what do we need to do to make the country healthy? Because having a right to a broken, disintegrated, unreliable system, what the hell's that?
Well, it's sick care versus health care.
Yeah. Right. So, you know, how's that going to help us? So anyhow, between the two, what I'm saying is, I think the key to all of these issues is the plan. And the thing that makes it difficult for us dyed-in-the-wool Democrats is Pelosi and Biden are not particularly revealing their strategy or plan. And as a result, we kind of feel like, well, there is no plan. But I kind of think there probably is.
Absolutely.
Well,
yeah.
let's go to Casey in a second. I just want to ask. So, you talk about the right to healthcare and the right to health right. So one of the big issues, as we know, and Grace, I want to bring you in on this, is that there are 2 things that the Republicans don't want to call infrastructure, but we know are seriously important for how society's evolving. One is childcare and one is caregiving, right? And both of those have a big part in the Build Back Better plan. And I mean, is your sense that?
And notice the gender of the likely of everyone is exactly. Both of those lanes.
Right, exactly. And we know that right now there is a labor shortage. I had Jen Benz on this show, right? He's an employee benefits expert the other, and I had this long, complicated question for her about why is there a labor shortage and why, you know, how are these people not getting, is it the unemployment payment or why are these people not getting, and she said, you got to remember, these jobs suck. That's why a lot of people don't want to go back and do
And they
them.
pay $8 an hour.
And that's it.
If
So
you're
what?
lucky.
The right thing. So the question is, I mean, Mike, do you think that a right to healthcare in a broken system includes a right to good caregiving and good, even childcare? Right? Do they fit under that definition? Because otherwise,
I mean, on a micro level, I look for compassion and understanding and partnership. And if you've spent any time in long-term care, you know that, these people who are working for practically nothing are breaking their backs literally and are next to godly in their performance. And they come to work every day. And a lot of them do it because they're mission driven. I always think of the Jamaican woman who took care of my mother-in-law in the last several years of her life. And she learned how to do this kind of work at her mother's knee in a neighborhood in Jamaica, which had no water and raw sewage. And the mother would send her as a child over to a neighbor's house who needed help. I mean, it was built in. This level of empathy and compassion was built into their culture, right? So, in America, can you reproduce that reliably? Probably not. Our culture is very much more aggressive and predatory and self-interested, but you can at least have a plan. And
point of clarification, the long-term care provisions were in Biden's infrastructure bill. They're not in the Build Back Better provision. The child care things are, but the home and long-term care provisions were in the Biden infrastructure bill.
They're in the infrastructure bill? They are?
They're out. They're not in the infrastructure bill that passed. They're in the infrastructure bill that Biden proposed, which was much more expensive than the 1.2. So that is not even currently being debated.
They're not in the 3.5 one?
No.
Well, more for
but
me.
just finishing up, my thing is, a lot of the macro issues revolve around the fact that we have no national plan for health. And as a result, when you encounter something like COVID, everything falls apart. I mean, literally everything falls apart because there is nothing there. And this kind of all goes back to the fact that we have given great leeway in our form of government to states' rights. And so we are reluctant to organize on a national level, which without checks and balances has created a lot of vulnerability. So anyway, I do think in some cases, like we've celebrated with the pandemic, our people, our fellow Americans are compassionate and do respond. But it's kind of hard to do it when you've got no plan and everything is as disorganized as it is.
Yeah, I mean, we have no plan, but meanwhile, the Cajun Navy, it's the Cajun Navy model is basically built on every other neighborhood helper thing I've ever seen. Yeah. It's just they have boats, and good for them because of where they live. They need the boats. But, our entire culture as Americans has been built on this myth of rugged individualism, which really flies in the face of how humans are wired to care for each other. We're pack animals. We're not, we're not lone wolves. And even wolves are not lone wolves, by the way, did you know? But, they work together. And I find that our insistence on the idea that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness will be delivered by a free market where every person, man, because it's usually men that they were talking about, always men, every man for himself. But meanwhile, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we are forces set in opposition from our founding. And, we've managed to hold the engine together with chewing gum and baling wire since 1776, and then later 1781, and then since then. But I do feel as though we are kind of coming apart at the seams at this point, and whether or not we will survive this particular passage is still an open question. And back to your comments about Kristen Sinema, I mean, she's basically Donald Trump in a dress with advanced degrees. To a degree, but she never really learned how to do anything. She shows up and does a thing and then moves on. I mean, if you look at her career history, it's not really that impressive. And she ended up, sort of lucking into a Senate seat, kind of. And as a result, there she is. And she and Manchin, who's a completely different pile of sewage, but she and Manchin have managed to hold the country hostage now for a year and some, year-ish, maybe a little longer. And I'm kind of tired of them. But, I don't live in West Virginia. I don't live in Arizona. Luckily, my two senators haven't plucked my last nerve yet. But my congressional representative, who I do like mostly, is in this problem solvers caucus that seems to be more into creating problems than solving them. And sadly, that grew out of the no labels movement, which happened at the beginning of the Obama administration, when bipartisanship was still kind of possible, except for OMG, there's a black man in the White House, and now we have to all lose our minds. And that appeared to happen for like 8 years on blast. And then we got what we got in 2016. So, we're not out of those woods yet. And, we're still arbitrating all of that. But meanwhile, COVID and, more debt than than anyone globally can even figure out what the number is on, just for our country, a low debt ceiling. But we're supposed to, I don't know. I mean, it's not like I'm out of hope, but hope is definitely hard to find most days here. And I'm not even talking about my cancer status. That actually I feel okay about. My country, less so.
On one of the Sunday shows last weekend, Justin Amash, the former Republican, whatever he is now, made a comment that Congress has turned from, a place where, people would debate and work together in good caucuses to a very top-down thing where a very small number of senators or congressmen go into some room, come up with some massive bill, foist it on everybody at the last minute, and then there's a straight line party line vote on it. And I think he's right. There's not really an effort to work together and to try to get things done by forming elite alliances across party lines and stuff like that. So I feel a little sympathy for Manchin and Sinema, because they are standing up and saying, I don't want to just take this stuff that's being forced down from the top. I would like to actually have a discussion and negotiations and figure out what the right thing to do is for the country and for my people.
I don't know whether you guys saw the survey last week of millennial Mormons, and 41% of millennial Mormons now self-identify as Democrat. So, things are changing. I mean, truly demographics are changing. Now, whether or not, which is my greatest concern, Pelosi and Biden can get this voting rights thing through, I don't know. But that said, I don't think anything is going to change the continuous evolution of people toward a more equitable society for America. I think that is underway.
Well, I mean, I hope so, right?
Tell it to Texas.
Well, you've got exactly. You've got enough. I mean, there are a number of things in the background. So it's all very well to say, let's, and Biden tried to work with, and they got Senate Republican votes in the Senate for the roads and bridges infrastructure bill and the broadband part. I didn't realize
Biden's plan didn't. It was Manchin's plan that got the Republican votes, not Biden's plan.
Yeah.
Right, because Biden got kicked out. And I thought some of that was going into the 3.5, and I didn't realize the caregiving thing is gone completely, which is actually really super bad news. But there is childcare in there, and there is, I just looked while we were doing, there is childcare, and there is Medicare expansion, and a bunch of other stuff in there as well. But a bunch of, it does come back to, like, me being, the guy who voted for Maggie Thatcher in 1979. Oh, no, not really.
You did?
They want to vote.
You did?
Oh, we're gonna have I was a good Tory back in the day before I got a job and realized what life was really like. But here's the point. In a sensible society, which we're not anymore, we're going to say that.
We never were.
You vote for a platform. And I was promised by Biden Medicare expansion to 60, which would be nice for me in 2 years. I was promised a public option. I was promised all this stuff that just disappears out of the whoop, doesn't even go into the conversation, right? And then you say, now we're at the point where, right, we can do, the Senate in 1978 and do horse trading amongst friends and all the rest of the stuff, and Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan can pal around and all the stuff. But realistically, as you said, Kim, it's coming down from the top. It's also coming down from a party on the right, on the Republican side, which is still dominated by Donald Trump and fielded Trump and Trumpisms and and like that. You've got DeSantis and Abbott and others going as hard as they can to prove that they're as far right as they can be. And you've also got the quote unquote moderates in that party, which is, I mean, Mitt Romney and maybe somebody else, not coming over, on some of these other issues, and not really seem to be prepared to break away from the stuff that you think will be fundamental about democracy, like all these voting rights, the voting rights bills, and all the attempts by all these states to basically stop minorities and other voting. So I think it's a very, very different world we're in. And because of the structure of America, let me remind you, the Democrats won 7 out of the last 8 presidential elections by any rational number, but didn't get to have their candidate in power in 2 of them. And the Senate is incredibly undemocratic, and that's the world we live in. And I don't know how we change it. So I'm with Casey. I'm not, but comparing our country to stage 4 cancer and saying that we're better off with the cancer.
Well, no, we're in stage 4 capitalism right now. But the issue, we're talking specifically about Congress and, the House and the Senate. Nancy Pelosi, there's that video that you just can't stop seeing that's happened since, what was it, 2000? It was either late 2009 or early 10, when they finally passed the bill known as the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, depending on where you sit. And there's that video of her saying we have to pass the bill in order to know what's in it. And people were like blowing up over that. And it's like, all I could do was sit there and go, seriously, people, have you ever been on the floor of Congress when one of these big bills was getting passed? There is so much crap, and there's different colored paper, and there's all of this flying around of paper in these really big bills where people are constantly inserting stuff in there that has to pass through a couple of eyeballs. Folks, sort of watchers on the floor. I can't remember exact job titles.
Are there fax machines there too? Sounds
Probably.
like
I mean, it was 2010. There's still fax machines anyway, but people are shoving, but it actually has to be a piece of paper and the right color piece of paper that gets shoved in this stuff. And it's like, as it gets rushed toward a final vote, things get vetted and then shoved in there, depending on what whether it's applicable or not, or if they can do it. And this is all like into the arcana of House rules and Senate rules. But when something finally bangs a gavel and they have the vote, there could be stuff in there that no one has seen except for the aides that wrote it and then got it shoved in under so-and-so's banner, who's, like the representing the District 12 in state X, or they're, the junior senator from wherever. But depending Casey, on where you are, I'm going to stop there and then move on to the idea that there has ever been any real bipartisanship or collegiality in the Senate or the House at all. Ladies and gentlemen, I invite you to watch the movie Lincoln again if you have any questions about how things actually happen. There's not direct money exchange anymore on the floor the way there was back in the 1860s, but it happens behind the scenes. You just don't see it. It's like I give up on the idea that we are able to prescribe democracy for any other bunch of jackwagons on this planet because of the way that we ourselves practice it. It's ugly, it's messy, it's never pretty. And we somehow manage to survive, but every time we get to these schism points, these fissure points that took us to a civil war in the 19th century, we managed to get out of the 20th century without actually having a civil war. But I don't know what's going on now. I'm still not clear. So this idea that we have the answer, we don't. And we're finding out that in real time in, thank you, 24-hour news cycle. But stay tuned for updates.
So one real minor point, right? It used to be that when they passed one of these big massive bills, they could go back and fix things later. And if you go back to 2010, that all the Affordable Care Act stuff, we had an entire Supreme Court case about one phrase that was ambiguous and should have been fixed, would easily been fixed in normal times and never was. And I think that's where we are. Anyway, Grace.
Mm-hmm. Well, you talk about the caregiving, and we talk about it like in the context of aging in place, maybe. But there's people, young people, children, young adults, people my age, the whole spectrum who need professional hired help because they're too sick, they're recovering, there's no benefits, people can't afford it. School's shutting down. I mean, before we got on, I was so excited to tell you guys, my kids are back in school. As someone who is a caregiver and care partner to 2 disabled adults, and now with a 3rd adult that recently in my family got very sick, it's not easy when you're trying to manage the children and your own health situation and the aging parents, and they won't let you into the hospital. The fact that I mean, God, I wish I knew what color paper and the timing was right, because I have a few ideas to shove into that stack of what we really need.
What you need to do is make friends with your senator and your
run for office, Grace. I would vote for you.
I don't have time, guys. I'm busy faxing and taking care of people because we can't hire anyone. So here's the thing, even hospice. I have patients that I work with that are in hospice, and the families, it was a journey for them to get to that point, to talk about considering hospice. And then they go into hospice, and then they're appalled that somebody comes for 1 hour every 3 days to check on the person who's actively dying. 1 hour, and they have nothing else. And there's staffing shortages, and there's not real quality because we don't pay these people who do really angels' hands work. We don't pay them enough. So there's a lot of turnover. A person who is actively dying deserves dignity at that time, and that family needs full support. And we just don't have that. So I'm frustrated when I see all the healthcare conferences about moving the care home and aging in place and all the technology, but we're not investing in the infrastructure to support the people that need to be there.
Yeah, it can't happen unless people actually get paid to do it.
Paid, and
you can have all the tech you
training.
want, but that still doesn't, that's not care. That's just facilitating care. But the actual care is delivered by humans. And if we're paying them $8 an hour, they're not going to show up.
Right. But what about, and then families doing it with no training?
Oh, hello. I did that. I did that myself for 2.5 years.
It's mind-boggling. There's no course on being a professional patient, let alone being a care partner or a caregiver. And someone could be in the hospital. We have plenty of people that we know who had extensive COVID-19 stays, and they went home and here, take care of them, monitor this, give them this medication, drive them here. Well, watch out for this. And if their heart rate drops, or, if they fall and have this, you just got to figure it out. It's really,
that's free market healthcare.
Well, we've got to a happy place there. So let me just say one more thing on this, and then we can move on and go back to the topic Grace raised about data and the patient empowerment part that I think you were talking about, Casey. But the one thing I would add, and this is something that I did in the conference I just put on, which I think Casey came to, which was called "Can venture-backed for-profit companies save healthcare?" And basically, I was looking at, there are 2 or 3 companies who said, we're going to go and really help in areas, and not necessarily just in caregiving, but I'm thinking about City Block here, which has now raised over $600 million to build a new type of medical group aimed at Medicaid and marginally insured people in inner cities. Unite Us, which has put a technology platform in place to connect healthcare providers, health plans, and individuals with all those social services agencies which had no technology and now can track a person and track them across multiple agencies like housing agencies and drug rehab agencies and food banks and God knows what else, and do social services and help sort of figure out if they can get them better care. There are a few others as well, but those 2 in particular, it struck me, and I asked the CEOs, I said, is this the answer? And IRM, the CEO of City Block, said, look, I was working on, as an activist working on single payer healthcare, and it ain't happening. And this is the next best thing I could do, right? It's like start a for-profit company. Now, what he said was there is money, and this is obviously there's a big problem in Medicaid expansion. He said there is enough money in Medicaid that you can get hold of it and reconstitute the care delivery and make life a lot better for the people you're delivering care to. And if you hear City Block, my line about City Block is, it sounds absolutely fantastic. It sounds like a massive improvement for the people who are now, going through City Block compared to what they'd experienced before. I'm not sure I'm prepared to move to Brooklyn and become very poor just to experience it. But it is. So I'm wondering if there are, if there are these new approaches can ameliorate it, because that kind of may be all we get. I don't know. You're all nodding sages there, you agree?
Well, I mean, I'll say that given that, we worship the free market as much as we do, well, okay, these are market answers to a problem that government has not fixed. But, I mean, the root issue here is what I call the Grover Norquist effect, which is, where the radical right in the United States and, with other countries as well. But, our radical right went through this thing about like just defund public sector spending to the degree that, the safety net is shredded and everything. And then, then we can say, we'll see, it doesn't work and march off and do our market forces thing. But the thing is that the market has not really stepped in to fix anything on a large enough scale, meaningfully enough to, take care of the social determinants of health issues that keep rearing their ugly heads. Like, if somebody doesn't have housing, it's really difficult to deliver them care because where are they? And if people have no housing, they're going to be having a lot of emotional issues that will manifest themselves in anything from psychotic breaks to substance use disorder. But how do you give them care? So the biggest problem is, do they have a house? The answer is no. Well, then, So if any of these people are not building housing as well, or supporting the building of housing, then #fail. And, #epic fail. So, you have to really start at the ground. If people don't have a place to live, they're not going to be terribly healthy. And solving for that. But then, again, if you look at the history of housing in this country, particularly in the time after we were maybe going to get better, but then we redlined everything. Whoops. So, back to the 3/5 rule. We're back at the 3/5 rule. And, we've never gotten out of that. That's the state rights thing. It's, a lot of the racism, all the racism, really. And it just, I don't know. I mean, this is why I still have some hope for myself, but I don't know about from a country. I'm waiting. The market has not shown me the fix yet.
I agree.
I'm a big fan of City Block. I don't know as much about it as you do probably, but what I know about it, I'm intrigued about it. But I also remember a couple of us on this call are old enough to remember something called social HMOs in the 80s.
Right.
They were the big idea about
HMOs at all.
long-term care and acute care and an HMO platform. And there were like five demos of them that were very promising, but then the thing just sort of petered out. It lost its funding, and they proved their effectiveness, but it just did not take off. So
no one was making billions.
Nobody was making millions. Yeah, they were all run out of like nonprofits, and they couldn't get a business model that worked, or they couldn't get policy people to continue to fund them.
Well, in the decade that I spent in Philadelphia in the late 1990s, they had a managed Medicaid program in the city with a special focus on maternal fetal health. And in that setting, you did have planning, and you did have integration of all the social determinants, and you did have movement of budgets across divisions, and you did have 5-year budgeting. So they would set a fee for a pregnant woman. They'd cover the prenatal care and they'd cover the postnatal care, but in addition, they'd cover early childhood educators in the healthcare sites to teach the mothers how to parent before the baby was born and to follow through for 5 years after the baby was born. So, there are models that have worked. When Kasich got his Medicaid expansion money, the first thing he did was integrate social determinants. The problem is that these politicians turn over. And obviously, some politicians decide to turn their back on free money because they just don't want to admit that they can't do it themselves, and they can't. So, I do think when you're talking about social determinants, private kind of enterprises can't even begin to carry the water. You're talking about integrating different sectors, and you're talking about prioritizing your expenditures, and you're talking about continuity across schools, across environmental sewage management and healthcare. No way. The only bodies that can handle that are government bodies, and the ones that are willing to do it oftentimes don't stay in their job long enough to see the impact.
I agree. It's I think that's right. It's just this huge topic, and it all comes down to, inequality, poverty, and the ability to manage, resources from the people who need it to the people who don't have, people who have it to the people who don't. And as far as I can see, we've got nowhere. I mean, despite the fact we had the biggest stock market boom in history, and we have billionaires popping up all over the place, mostly in space, right? Well, in space for brief periods of time.
Send them up to the moon. Can we send them to the moon for like a couple of years?
I do think it's remarkable that ProPublica has just had this series of articles about all these different ways of essentially tax cheating that have been done by the supreme wealth, Peter Thiel and God knows who else.
Yeah, Thiel is like
almost no. I've seen almost no political or other reaction to the fact that we need. Other than Elizabeth Warren saying we should do a wealth tax and getting.
No, that's how Americans keep score, dude. How much money do you have? Whoever has the most beans wins.
Well, I mean, that is the other line. Anyway, sorry, Kim, and then we should quickly, for the last few minutes, go to Grace's earlier point about data. So
2 points that Biden is not getting credit for they should. One is that the child poverty was cut more than last year than it's been cut in 30 years because of the child tax credits last year. And 2, the SNAP had its biggest increase in benefits since, I don't know. And so those are both very important things to a vast number of people that really need government help and are finally getting better assistance from it. So I think they should be, talking about that a lot more. The child tax credit is the kind of thing that's in the Build Back Better that needs to be passed because it really has a dramatic impact on child poverty and thus on health and well-being and so on.
And to be fair, that started before the Biden administration. That was part of the CARES Act, right? And there was also, and I have kids, I'm sure Grace you have as well, but I'm getting the $300 a month check, sent to me, which is something which is quite clever because when Obama cut taxes for people as part of the temporarily as part of the ARR, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, was that it in 2009? No one noticed, right?
Yeah,
they didn't actually send them a check. So the politics of sending people a check and saying this is the government sending you a check for your child credit is pretty good. And don't forget, George Bush did that, right, with his $300 check in 2001 before all hell broke loose the end of that year. So I mean, but on the other hand, I'm still thinking that we had a chance. We elected somebody who said they were going to fix a bunch of this stuff, and because of the machinations of politics, the parliamentarian and reconciliation, all the other stuff, a significant majority who wants to get something done, which I think is where the country is, and as Mike says, is where the country is going more and more, with the millennial Mormons now being 40% socialists or whatever. It's tough to think we're doing that. And we're doing this against a background where, Trump is still out there and there are all these people going after stopping the steal, and there's this whole right-wing fallacy, which is dominating a huge amount of the country. And I'm with Casey. I'm not optimistic this week. All right, stop talking about this. For the last 8-9 minutes, I want to go back to where Grace raised earlier, which is the data issue. And then Casey, tell us about the conference you were at. So Grace, you go first, and then we'll go to Casey.
Well, so the article that I was referencing and the conversations that I've been having, and it's this pushback that patients can't handle it. They're not going to understand. You need to get your results in person. And that's the way it's always been. And this is the most comforting way. And look, I get all that, but you may know that I was misdiagnosed with advanced lymphoma years ago. And I vividly remember the phone call. I was in the city, sitting down with my coffee for a meeting, and my doctor called me and said, you need to come to my office right away. I had just had a PET scan the day before. I knew, knowing what I do, that this isn't good. If they're calling you the next day to come in, I said, Doc, can you just tell me, because I'm 3 hours away? No, you have to come in. You have to come in. So I did come in. I did receive my results in person, and they were wrong. Okay. So 4 months later, I was cleared of this diagnosis, and it was a misdiagnosis and a fungal infection I got on my honeymoon. I did not get a good delivery of results. There was no compassion. There was no pause. It was all a blur. The doctor just kept talking, didn't pause, said, you probably have this, and this is what we need to do, and just kept talking. And finally, after maybe 10 minutes of talking, asked if I had questions. And the only thing I could muster up was, am I going to die? So I have seen this over and over. There's this misunderstanding that patients can't handle or can't understand, or meanwhile, listen to all the complexities that you guys have all touched on and how complicated and fragmented and broken healthcare is. We have vulnerable and immigrant populations and those with limited English proficiency who are navigating this every day, as are the executives and the wealthy who can't do it either, because healthcare in the US brings you to your knees. But we can't give our patients a copy of their records because they can't handle it. I'm sorry. But on the other side of the coin, we have no problem sending patients astronomical bills that they can't understand that can total into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. We have no qualms sending those within a few days of being discharged, with no explanation, no hand holding, no support, no consideration if a person could afford it. So I find it very ironic that there's such pushback at giving the results, but there's no pushback against sending these damaging, astronomical financial toxicity inducing bills, even to people who may be grieving. We're cool with that, but don't give patients their medical records. They can't handle it.
Just a terrible.
Absolutely.
New York Times
Absolutely.
Sorry, Casey.
No. I mean, I'm what? Go ahead.
I'll go ahead. Then you go.
It's your show.
There was an article. There was an article in the New York Times about a couple who were between insurance companies and basically making Mount Sinai having a fight with United or Aetna, one of the two, and they got.
Wasn't that Libby Rosenthal?
I don't know if she wrote it or not. I think she
lived it. I think that was her story. I think. Anyway,
I'll go back, but it was recent. This is post Libby's book of 3 years ago, talking about the stuff. But they were in send a bill for a child who died, right, for like $250,000. Anyway,
Yeah. Well, I've been on all points of this compass because I clearly recall being in the funeral home, planning the funeral for my mother, who had died 29 days after my dad had. And this was in, same funeral home, same funeral director. I, of course, being me, when I walked in, said to the funeral director, who was a great guy, I said, Fred, it's been less than 30 days. Did we get a volume discount? And he got yelled at by some other bunch, Waking and Edna over in room B, because we had the temerity to laugh in there. And I'm like, hey, if anybody needs to laugh, it's you guys. Anyway. But they, I get a phone call on my mobile. This was, I had one still. Even then I'd had one for 10 years, a mobile phone. And it was the nursing home calling, the accounting department calling to find out when we were going to settle the bill, the final bill for my dad, who had died 29 days previous, for my mother who had died the night before, and then now I'm planning the funeral for my mother who died the night before. It was $50,000. We had it. We just hadn't gotten around to paying it yet. Can you give me a minute? But I blew the guy's face off and then blew off the executive director of the nursing home's face an hour later when I went over there to say, you really need to have a talk with your accounting team about looking at records for the patient. Anyway, the data issue, the disclosure of data, Grace, you saw that whole conversation I had with Jean-Luc, who's been, we've been together on this show more than once, and he's been on my podcast. And I get the perspective of the MDs who want to be humans and deliver this human news to the human. But then too often it's the experience that Grace had. It's like, here's a, fire hose blast of information that may or may not even be correct, but here it is. And blah, but no, we can't, we're going to make you drive 3 hours to get it. And I got my diagnosis of my recurrence by reading an MRI report. I read the MRI report. It was released to me in the portal. This is the very thing these guys people are arguing about. It's like, well, patients in the portal, it's bad, it's terrible. They don't understand. Well, I totally understood. And maybe I would have needed somebody to help me read it if I wasn't me. But even then, it's like, why can't the patient's desire for information sharing be made part of the algorithm that delivers the information? And why is the information as shitty as it is? Because it's just, it's black and white on, it's like you're reading it on your phone or you're reading on a tablet or a desktop or whatever, but it's words. It's not, like a decent interpretation of what the words mean. You have to know how to interpret what the words mean. And even the doctor is going to do a crappy job generally of doing that. And, it's like, why oh, and by the way, Cheryl Clark, who wrote that article, is a good friend of mine. Her head's in the right place. So, I mean, anyway, so we could have this conversation, at a different time. But
other industries where if things were too complicated for their users to understand, they would seek to find ways to explain it better and more easily. In healthcare, we like the paternalistic approach where, no, we have to explain it to you because it's really too complicated for
it's
you.
too
Like,
complicated.
maybe you need to address the root problem here.
I mean, there's a language root problem, right? So my joke on this whole thing between JL and Deepesh and David was, I think you two are positive about it being negative. But I mean, the fact that, if something's bad, it's positive. And if something's good, it's negative in lab testing. Just that for the start of it, right? Is like, it is.
Oh, and don't get me started on their attempts to be like, visually giving you information on lab results.
Well,
I can see a graph on this. No, I can't. I can see a graph of current results, the actual thing, like bars with colors, normal, not normal, whatever. That's helpful. But on the desktop is where I can actually get a graph of previous results. Why can't I get that on here? Judy, are you listening?
Probably not. But Kim had a great article on THCB last week about design. And I think we don't have. We're coming out of the last couple of minutes, but we don't have time to discuss it. But there have been attempts, and I did that conference that you came to, Casey, with folks at MAPA and others who've been trying to get design into healthcare. But it's been one of those things, and I have an awful story, which I heard in the background of that conference, which is that someone was complaining about one of the health plans and their inability to display a bunch of data and sort out the whole issue around funding and EOBs and billing and what have you on their website. And I was told, I was saddled up to by somebody who said, I was executive of that health plan when that, and we put aside $30 million to fix this. And then we had a bad quarter and the $30 million disappeared and went to the bottom line instead. And it was perceived that, fixing something to make our consumers' lives better wasn't quite as important as hitting Wall Street's numbers. And so we never fixed it.
I'll say though, I understand the health plan EOBs much better than I understand provider bills. I never get a provider bill, but I can understand how they got to that number without actually going back to the EOBs and trying to do line by line. They just want to show me the end result of what I owe, not how they got to that number.
It's a war out there, and the bystanders are getting shot.
Yeah. And by the way,
all right. We are at 1 minute away from the end of the show, so we're going to wrap this the way we normally do. It's been a great and feisty THCB gang to come back with. Looking forward to doing many more of these. But let's quickly go around and give me 30 seconds each on what you are expecting, looking for, considering, and got your eye on for the next week or two. And I'll start with you, Grace.
I'm continuing to follow this trend. So Cheryl Clark has written a number of pieces. I encourage everyone to read them because this is an ongoing conversation. So I'm going to be following this. And I think what I'm going to need to put together is a Mythbusters here to really get to the crux of what's not being said just on paper. And let's have it in one place.
And remind us, Grace, that's in MedPage. It was in MedPage today?
Yes, that's correct. MedPage today.
What was the title of this article? I know you said at the start.
Privacy exception, no cure for doctors, open notes headaches.
All right, we'll keep going on that one. Mike.
I think you're on to something, Matthew, in terms of flipping a negative into a positive. And the area where I think health technology needs to have us get some perspective is this states' rights issue. Because it has the ability to eliminate geographic boundaries. Recently, there's been a lot written about the right to have a vaccine and whether or not you can mandate it. And that was actually decided in 1905 in Jacobson versus Massachusetts by Chief Justice Roberts' favorite justice, Justice John Marshall Harlan. And he decided that individual liberties had to give way in this case, and everybody had to get vaccinated to protect the citizens of Cambridge, Massachusetts. Well, what makes this interesting, that was in 1905, is that in 1927, in Buck versus Bell, the Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes decided that based on that decision, it was okay to cut the fallopian tubes of what was then called 3 generations of imbeciles. Over the next 3 years, in 24 states, 60,000 women were sterilized without their acceptance or will. So the point being that there's a lot of unintended consequences that go back and forth on this very complicated issue of whether we should have state or federal control. And all you have to do is look at Trump and realize that a national plan is great as long as you have a wise national leader. But if you don't have a wise national leader, it eliminates the checks and balances that these various different states were supposed to offer. So we still need a lot of work in this area, and I'm thinking health technology may have a role to play.
All right, and there'll be an article from Mike from those you on THCB coming out in the next few days about that topic of vaccine mandates. I've seen it, fascinating. Casey.
Well, I will just observe quickly that last week, the conference I attended was in the same hotel in Boston that Health Experience Refactored was in back in 2017 when you had that conversation with that health insurance payer executive. But I will make the same observation that I did at the end of an audacious leadership panel at that conference last week, which is audacious leadership in healthcare to me would be an entire system taking its whole annual budget for ad and marketing for a year. Whoever that is, hospital, payer, doesn't matter, take their entire ad and marketing budget for a year, repurpose it to social determinants of health and health equity in the community they serve, and then come back to me and tell me about your audacious leadership.
I like it.
That was a mic drop on Tuesday night.
I like it. I'll cover comment at the end. Kim.
Well, now that Mike has reassured me that Nancy has a plan, I'm looking forward anxiously to see the fruition of it. So I'm looking forward to the next couple of weeks.
Right. Well, I will end by thanking everybody. My last comment is that on Thursday night next week, I'll be at this UCSF Health Awards, which is being held in the Chase. So it's at UCSF. It's being held in the Chase Center across the street because UCSF is not allowing crowds to come in. Apparently, the Chase Center is. Chase Center is where the Golden State Warriors play their basketball, new arena, sponsored by Kaiser Permanente. Last night I went to the Giants game. The Giants, as I said, we were hoping to win the National League West and maybe the World Series. Giants, sponsored by Dignity Health. It does say has get vaxxed, get your vax carved into the turf as you look down at the field. And across the street from them is a Sutter Health walk-in clinic. So the four big players in the Bay Area, Stanford didn't somehow get it. Doesn't actually get itself wishes, but the four other big players in the Bay Area are going to be competing about who's really managing or creating the super spreader events, as far as I can see. So there is plenty of that media marketing going on just in connection with sports teams and God knows what else. So Casey, hopefully you'll get your wish, but I doubt it because the execs will want to go and sit in those boxes.
They want the skybox.
They want the skybox. All right. So I'm going to be delighted. This has been a fantastic conversation. I want to thank my guests, Kim Bellard, writer and contributor from the wilds of Cincinnati in the Eastern Standard Time, as we found out. Grace Cordovano from New Jersey. Casey Quinlan from Richmond.
Somehow you managed to cut Mike off.
What happened? Something weird went with the sharing. There's a weird issue with the sharing of there we go. Now hopefully that should be working. There's a weird issue with the sharing of PowerPoint slides in Zoom. Zoom's got too popular or something. I don't know. Anyway, Casey Quinlan from Richmond, Virginia, and Mike Magee from Connecticut. You've been listening to, I'm Matthew Holt. You've been listening to THCB Gang, episode 65, September the 30th, 2021. We are now in the books. Thanks for watching us live. Thanks for listening on the podcast. We will see you all next week, which I think by my math is October the 7th, with episode 66. See you then.